is Professor Manique Gunesekera. She's the Professor of English and the Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Kelaniya. Professor Manique is also a well-known professor of English. She's holding the chair of English at the University of Kelaniya. Her research interests are socio-linguistics, discourse analysis, business communication, grammar, and language change. She has edited English in Sri Lanka, the book, Ceylon English, Lankan English, Sri Lankan English in 2010, along with Professor Shiromi Fernando and Professor Arjuna Parakrama. She had many publications, and she has published The Post-Colonial Identity of Sri Lankan English, published in 2005 and republished in 2010. Her most recent publication is Language of Corporate Communication in Journal of Business Communication, co-authored with Paris Rogers and Yang Mei Ling. That was in 2011. She is a member of some important task forces, Presidential Task Force for Trilingual Sri Lanka, and the Task Force in Education Reforms in English. She's a visiting lecturer in very many universities, and the UGC has very recently given her a task, a very important task, to prepare English books, not textbooks, English books, high quality, low cost for our children, especially for the rural sector, and she has not said no. Over to you, Professor Manique Gunesekera.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Fellow panelists, or plenary speakers, officers of the forces, especially the teaching staff, my students, Kitsiri, Erandi, Tilini, and Vasuki. I'm very happy that you are teaching in this illustrious institution. I have the privilege of having come here as a child with my parents under different dispensation. And I would also like to say that the last time I came here was for the English Day. And I told the then commandant, I hope when I next come, there will be women students. So I'm happy that that has been established. So I'm happy that KDU is keeping abreast of the times. And I would like to focus on linguistic diversity, which is my topic. So communication amidst linguistic diversity in 21st century Sri Lanka. I put in this picture because this shows the diversity we live with. As Professor Kusuma, the former speaker, said, we started with monastic education. I come from the university which has a tradition of monastic learning, and even now we have the Buddhist monks who are also our colleagues, they are students and teachers, along with the lay people, when initially this whole university was devoted only to monastic learning. So I'm going to talk about language families of Sri Lanka, linguistic heritage, the trilingual policy, language rights, and communication issues. Language families. Sri Lanka is very lucky. We have three main language families represented in the languages of our country: the Indo-Aryan or Indo-European, the Dravidian, and the Austronesian. Now these are well-known language families, and I have to tell you that until I studied linguistics at the University of Michigan, I did not know that we had such a rich diversity of languages. In fact, one of the linguistics professors said, you come from a beautiful country which has so many language families, and I was ashamed. I didn't even know what he was talking about. But the language families are mainly these Indo-Aryan or Indo-European, to which English, Sinhala, French, many languages belong to the Indo-European language family. Then we have the Dravidian family, which is as well known, but of course due to very many reasons which are geopolitical, we tend to think it is subservient to the Indo-European legacy. So the Dravidian families, language families found in Sri Lanka are Tamil and Telugu, which a previous speaker referred to. The Austronesian link is very interesting. It is Ceylon Malay, which is now called Sri Lankan Malay. So the questions, amity or hostility.
I think we all know that we have all lived with our cultures and our diversity of languages through the ages. The linguistic labels have been used for politics from Europe to Asia to Australia. So for example, the famous Aryan myth, which Hitler propagated, was really a language label. It's the language family of Aryan languages which was used and subverted for political reasons. Similarly, the term Semitism. Semitic means the Arabic languages and Hebrew, but when we think of anti-Semitism, we just think of being against the Jews. The classical languages of Sri Lanka. So we have classical Arabic from the Moor and the Malay communities. We have Pali, the language of Buddhism. We have Sanskrit, which many of our languages come from, and from Hinduism. And we have Latin, the language of the Christian minority. I put in this picture because recently we did a linguistic field trip from the University of Kelaniya, and we went to a Walaua in Ampare. This was the heartland of the elephant collecting or herding institution or organization, and we found this motto which is written in Latin. I thought this was very interesting, the use of Latin or the classical languages even in domestic spheres. The linguistic heritage of Sri Lanka. So the major language families, this does not mean superior. As I said, we have English and Sinhalese from the same parental family of Indo-European or Indo-Aryan. Then we have the Dravidian languages, and we also have lesser known languages. Can anyone identify which ethnic group or language family the person in the picture belongs to? Totally marginalized. Yeah, you all are now playing with the term language family. This is a very isolated linguistic community in the eastern province called Aligambe, not the fashionable, sophisticated Arugambe. This is Aligambe, and these are the Sri Lankan gypsies. The Sri Lankan gypsies who are known as snake charmers and palmis. But they have, I must say, along with this desire to merge with the majority, they no longer practice either of those arts. They have said that they belong to the majority and they barely speak their language. But this person is interesting. She's the oldest woman of Aligambe, and she spoke to us in her language, which is Telugu, which is originally from Hyderabad, and it is a Dravidian language, but the Sri Lankan version is Tulu. So she's a Tulu speaker, and they are beetle chewers, and they have this little pouch which they call nochi, which hangs from their waist. And that is a characteristic of their language and their culture. Okay, so the linguistic heritage of Sri Lanka, languages of the now subaltern communities. I want to use this term subaltern because I think it's a military term, but subaltern in language terms means the voiceless. So the subaltern communities are people who are denied a voice. So these are the absolute minorities, right? I would say that these are people who are marginalized in society in many ways to the point where they never get a hearing. For example, the street workers. The street workers or sex workers are subaltern because nobody ever listens to them other than in non-formal situations. So I have given you here a few of the languages like Telugu or Tulu, the language of the gypsies, the Ahikuntaka. The Ahikuntaka itself is a subaltern term. Then you have the Vedda language, which is now called Adivasi. So according to the linguistics department of the University of Kelaniya, the word Vedda is too derogatory. So please use the term Adivasi, which is a much nicer term, right? So we have the language of the gypsies, we have the language of the Adivasi, we have the language called Gadri. Gadri is the language of the Rodi people. So this is yet another language of our country. And we have Portuguese Creole, which is the remnant of the Portuguese invasion of Sri Lanka. The Portuguese Creole is a very interesting story. We still have pockets in Putlam and Mana, some areas. I'm sure some of the officers have been to these places. Portuguese Creole would have been the language of Sri Lanka if the British had not taken over the maritime provinces. Because even during Dutch times, their language of communication, the language of trade, was Portuguese Creole. The Dutch were very stingy with their language. They didn't want it taught to everybody, so therefore they kept it as theirs. But Portuguese Creole was the language of the bazaar, the language of trade. Subsequently, English became the language of trade. Okay, the trilingual policy. I want to spend a little time on this just to tell you now, we have so many languages, we have so many cultures, but we are aiming at a trilingual policy. So language, this is from Dr. Sunimal Fernando's Socio-Linguistic Survey of Sri Lanka. When when the president launched the trilingual policy in 2012, he read out this statement that language is the soul of a people. It provides character, renders individuality in a social milieu that endows each person with a sense of identity. Language, nevertheless, cannot be imposed on a people. The world is replete with examples of failure when governments attempted to impose a language on a people against their will. So this is because the trilingual policy, which I think as a linguist is a very healthy policy, because it is trying to teach each of us the other's language. So it is a very ennobling task. It's also a very ambitious project. And just to tell you one of the examples of a government imposing a language on its people and succeeding is the story of Israel. Israel, when it was created, did not have one language unifying its people because the people came from Europe, from Africa, from all over. What the Israeli government did was they said Hebrew is going to be the language of Israel. Hebrew is an old language which was not spoken by anybody. But they enforced it, and of course you know Israel is like a military state, so therefore they enforced that, but it worked. Because remember, it served a purpose. Everybody had to get together, you had to rule this new country, right? Whether it was wrested from other people or not, they had to rule the country. So the language of Israel was Hebrew, which came top down. Okay. Good afternoon, Commandant, Vice Chancellor. Right, okay. The trilingual policy, my experience is that when we learn subjects in our own mother tongue, we learn faster and can grasp the inherent meaning of the subject. And we start thinking naturally. This is what the former President of India, Abdul Kalam, said at the launch of the trilingual policy. So the essence of the trilingual policy is that both Sinhala and Tamil is to be used in official documents, and the population to be trilingual as soon as it is practically feasible. As I said, as a linguist, I welcome this venture, although look at the problems of implementation. The problems of implementation of the trilingual policy, one is the issue of identity. Now, what are we going to do with the people who speak these other languages? Are we going to enforce that they only limit themselves to these 3 languages? Look at the Malay community. They are quadrilingual. Right? Arabic for classical purposes, Malay in the home, English, Sinhala, Tamil for trading. Right? So that is a very rich and diverse community. Now suddenly we are going to tell them be trilingual. Or even worse, we are telling the bilingual population of Sri Lanka, you have to be trilingual, which again is a worthy goal but difficult to implement. Look at the state of the national anthem. Right? The national anthem of South Africa is sung in the languages of South Africa. Right? Now that is a goal if our people allow it for us to get there. Right? In Singapore, they have different versions of the national anthem. Right? That may cause more trouble for us than having one national anthem. Right? But these are issues for you as students to think about. Right? Should the language, if you're going towards a trilingual policy, should we use it for the national anthem, which is an emblem of identity? Right? So that's one issue. Then teaching policies. And even worse, trilingual exams. Right? Do we have the capacity, we who are struggling with bilingual teaching, do we have the capacity to teach and examine students on a trilingual basis? Language rights. So in the chapter on language, it is stated that the official language of Sri Lanka shall be Sinhalese, and Tamil will also be an official language, and English is referred to as a link language. However, now this is the de jure situation. I have to tell you, de facto, everybody wants English. Right? However much you may tell people this is the language of your heritage, you better talk English, you better talk Sinhala or Tamil, whatever. English is just the link language. English has become de facto the most prestigious language of our country. Right? So this is another reality which we have to deal with. It's like that Aligambe, the marginalized people, they have decided to make Tamil their identity. So you have one graduate teacher in this community. She calls herself a Tamil and she teaches in a Tamil school. Right? So you see how the marginalized, the subaltern is losing their voice further. Right? In about 10 years' time, Aligambe won't exist. It certainly won't exist as a Tulu-speaking colony. Right? It will be, like everybody else in that area, Muslim Tamil. Okay, communication issues. So communication theory is based on 4 well-known principles: audience analysis, the structure of the message, channel of communication, and cultural context. For example, the Space Shuttle Challenger, when it was destroyed in 1986, they did a study which showed that the key contributing factors, I'm jumping to the last line of the first paragraph, the key contributing factors to the accident were organizational culture and decision-making processes, and their disregarding of warnings from the engineers about the dangers of launching posed during low temperatures. So you can see it was communication or lack of communication which caused this terrible disaster. Okay, so communication issues in Sri Lanka. Linguistic diversity, which we have inherited, which is wonderful, which gives us languages, varieties. Then you have the choice of what language, what register, what profession, and the choice of genre, format, and culture. Just to illustrate a little bit, languages and varieties, wherein lies the standard? What is correct and not correct? Now, as a professor of English, people are eternally asking us, what is the correct pronunciation? What is the correct spelling? Is it all right to use American spelling? Right? It is fine. The whole world is using American spelling, but we are trying not to. Right? So we have to keep abreast of change. You can't say we are a former British colony, we can only use British English. Right? That was those days. Right? Now we have to move with the times. We can use all varieties of English if we want to. Okay? Right. And I just want to give you an example of forms of address. We have foreign students who learn Sinhalese at the University of Kelaniya, and one of them was learning Sinhalese and practicing and then said that he wants to talk to the Vice Chancellor. And can you believe what this student went to the Vice Chancellor and said? He said, "Aiboang Machang." Right? Because that's what he had heard all over the university. So just to tell you, you have a choice of languages, you have a choice of registers, but you must know what to use where. Okay, I'm going to jump to my last slide. Okay, in the official domain, we have official letters, memos, reports, interviews, presentations, research papers. These are classical genres, right? If you're learning a language for official purposes, you learn how to handle most of these. However, the format of these also keep changing, and you have to be aware of that. For example, when we taught the officers of Staff College, Sapugaskanda, we told them a memo has to be signed at the top. It is to, from, and the rest. And they turned around and told us, you all are living in another world. If you sign the memo at the top, somebody else will quietly write something at the bottom. Right? So you have to know the organizational culture. Right? And just the last point, interview skills. We teach interview skills to our students, and one of the tricks we say is speak more than the interviewer. You must speak more than the interviewer to show you are in command of the situation, that you are confident. Again, the officers of Sapugaskanda told us, thanks to you, we'll get sacked. If we speak more than the senior officer, we won't get the promotion or the confirmation. So you have to learn the culture, and the rules of language are culture bound. For example, Oscar Wilde, a brilliant British playwright, what did he say? The world was my oyster, but I used the wrong fork. So remember, the rules are important. The rules are changing, but you have to keep using them. Okay, so just here, okay. You all are officers. We constantly get letters from officers here with attached. Ladies and gentlemen, women and men, this is totally old-fashioned. Just say, attached is my resume. Okay? Second, dear sir, all leaders of heads of organizations are no longer sir, please make it dear madam sir. Okay, madam stroke sir. And even there, the comma is no longer used, it is the colon. Okay, so even punctuation has changed. Yours obediently went out with the empire, thank God. Chairman no longer exists, I'm sure chairperson will agree. This last one, orphanage. This is a question from the MBA students. One of the MBA students asked me, what is the politically correct term for orphanage? He said his boss had said to us because they do corporate social responsibility and they don't want to use the word orphanage. And I'm pleased to announce to you that the government of Sri Lanka, the social services department had issued an edict to all orphanages saying orphanage is too negative. Use child development society. So this was a great find for us that we discovered that even that department was keeping ahead of the changes in language. So handicapped is out. What is the positive term? My students, see if you can tell me. Differently abled, thank you. Okay, and the last one, prostitute. Sex worker, okay. Right, so language change, I'm ending with Shakespeare, which is my area of study. When Hamlet said to Ophelia in Hamlet, get thee to a nunnery. What do you think a nunnery was? It was a brothel in Elizabethan England. Okay, right, I'm ending with that, madam. Okay. Conclusion. Kaludia Pokuna, just one public area. Okay? Are we heading towards a trilingual policy? Okay, right, just food for thought. This is where we should go, right? If it is public space, we must use all three languages. Thank you very much.